Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is language. And we often think that we use language to convey our ideas, but we also get to look at how the language that we use shapes our ideas and our experience. So that it should be an interesting conversation. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, energizing all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Very softly, let's rub our fingers against our palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation and the tickling and the tingling, and allow that sensation to bring you present to your body right here, right now, to this wonderful physical vehicle that allows us to experience life. And welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. And it's always great to be here with you. And today we're talking about language and really the power of language to shape our experience. And for not just, it's not just a vehicle of our communication, it's also something that shapes our capacity for communication and our experience. So we get to dig into that a bit. Good morning, Lisa. Happy New Year to you. Welcome, welcome. It's great to have you back with us. And yeah, so language. It's really interesting, you know, in the coaching work I do, a lot of what we do is reframing. So reframing is creating a new context or new language for an experience. So one of the most obvious reframing what would it be called? Mechanisms maybe might be for when we talk about I have to do this, I have to do that. And there was a training, emotional intelligence training that I took called Next Level, and they reframed. And actually, I think that this reframe also existed from Landmark Education, from instead of I have to, I get to. And if we tune into the experience of those two different phrases, it's very different. The tonality of it, the resonance of it, the vibration or frequency of it's very different. I have to, meaning that, you know, like I'm kind of at the effect of, versus I get to, meaning there's an expansiveness in that, you know, like it's an opportunity. And the shift of phrase from oppression to opportunity is profound. So Lisa says, my mother made me go to EST when I was a teenager, so I chose to go to EST, and I guess that's really different. And I'm wondering, Lisa, what was your experience? Because I came out, this is just funny. because I've been transformation oriented for forever, but I came out of that experience and the I don't, to give away the punchline, it was, this is it. And I'm like, what the hell do you mean this is it? Are you kidding me? This is, I was pissed. I was really angry coming out of it. And I can say that I did it again a couple times, in fact, and over the years, I have had revelations come out of that experience where I've I've had moments where the understanding of what was being conveyed broke through, and I got it. I got it in a whole different way. And I'm wondering if you've had a similar experience. No matter, despite the resistance that I had, I still have had ripples continuing from that experience in the early 80s for me, that percolate into my life in a meaningful and positive way. So I'm wondering if that's an experience that you have. It used to be the S training, and now it's migrated or evolved into landmark education. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what we're talking about, now it's called the Forum. And it is about presence. Ultimately, it's really about presence. And I didn't even have a conversation or space for a conversation about presence at that time. Didn't have a concept of presence, I don't think, at that time. Anyway, that I took it initially. So language, when we talk about language, so much. Good morning, Susan. So good to have you here with us. Welcome. When we talk about language, it brings up the story for me of, and I don't know if this is true or not true, but that Eskimos have a multitude of words for snow. In our culture, we have several, snow, flurry, slush, whatever. But when snow is a pervasive part of your existence, then it would make sense that you would have a multitude of words describing it, right? And as a result of that multitude of words, there is a more refined perception, of that particular thing. So if the Eskimos have a multitude of words for snow, they're able to make distinctions of all these different states of snow that might otherwise be invisible to those of us who don't have that language. We don't make that distinction. So the question is, do we not have the language because we don't make the distinction, or do we not make the distinction because we don't have the language? So this is a really interesting conversation, because it brings us into the merits of expanding our vocabulary to include valuable new distinctions. So before we go there, Lisa says, you have to get it. I was young. This is about the EST experience. I mostly remember them telling me about being a victim. I had no clue. I just felt amused at the others trying to get it. Yeah, so that was the whole thing, get it. Did you get it? Got it. Good. That was part of the S training, like trying to get it. Like, what was it? It was this whole thing about our beingness and really being at cause in our lives. um, she made me and my siblings go. I even volunteered for them at one point. So Lisa, I would venture to say that who you are today is shaped by that experience. I guess we're shaped by all experiences, but that experience is one of creating a new context for living and new languaging and new perception. So I know as much as I might want to deny it or rebel against it or whatever, that it has had a lot to do with shaping me. So Susan says, knowing, question mark. So I think to get back to this notion of language, I don't know about you, especially when we're talking about knowing, I have come up against the limitations of language or my limitations with language to convey certain experiences and certain concepts. Maybe not concepts, but experiences more so. So if we have had transcendent types of experiences, our language doesn't capture that. It alludes to it. And so years ago, I studied NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And one of the things that they say so accurately and eloquently is the map is not the territory. And what that means is that our representation of the thing is not the thing itself. So let's say we've had a transcendent experience. However much we speak about it, it's not the experience itself. And speaking about it doesn't necessarily enable us to retrieve the experience itself. So Lisa says, it gave me the knowledge without even realizing. Exactly. This is again with S, because it's an immersive experience and there's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens because there's a lot of rewiring of the brain and you don't even know what's getting put in there. So Lisa continues. So when I was something out of my depression, it was good to have those tools in my wheelhouse. Yes. So there are when I was climbing out of my depression, it was good to have those tools in my wheelhouse for sure, because a lot of what was taught in the S training and the forum has become much more mainstream in our thinking, that we're not victims, that we have sovereignty, to be able to reconnect with our power of choice and choosing our perception, for example. But anyway, to get back to knowing and the limitations of language to really convey the essence or the experience of ineffability, something that is indescribable in language, so that language doesn't capture. So we're talking about the map not being the territory. We can describe something, but the description is not the thing. And so there are limitations of words. And actually, this is where poetry has its power, because poetry, by combining words that might not otherwise be combined, can be very evocative, can be creating a visceral experience that our words in their linearity wouldn't otherwise convey. So when we speak of the scent of a color, for example, it makes our mind go into a different space, and an imaginal space, a space that is perhaps beyond language, because we don't normally think of colors as having an aroma or a taste, right? But when we start talking about things in that way, it's activating a different level of beingness that that can transcend the linear, the rationality, in big air quotes, of conventional, I'll just say conventional language. So that's where the power of poetry can transcend that and create something experiential. So good morning, Dennis. Bon matin, buenos dias, guten morgen. I know guten tag, buongiorno, ben dia, supra. Oh my gosh, I can't even say half of these, Dennis. You're amazing and very funny. It's great to have you here. Welcome, welcome. And so Susan says, uplifting each other, very soothing and healing. Yes, stillness. Yes, so there's a I think we might have hit on something inadvertently in talking about, for instance, the taste or the scent of a color, because what's happening is that it's blending senses in a way that we don't normally experience them. And therefore creating a more holistic experience, or a more three-dimensional kind of experience. And creative use of language can be really, really powerful, and it can be expansive. And that's why, you know, new terms that are coined can be super powerful too. The thing is that our language does create a container and a context through which we communicate. And we have a lot of words in our common language that are elevated and accepted, that I believe shape our perception and our the zeitgeist of our culture. So I think I'm using that word right. Anyway, for instance, you know, dominate the market and conquer the obstacles. And, you know, these kinds of phrases that are used in marketing a lot are indicative of an oppositional approach to relationship and to engagement with others, right? I'm going to dominate the conversation. I'm going to world domination. Like there's a friend who has a marketing company, and it's talking, I forget, but it's something like world domination with your brand or something like that. Susan says, I don't pay attention to that. Well, that's awesome. And, you know, I think that that's a choice we have. Awareness, if we don't have an awareness, then we can be impacted by things more readily on an other than conscious level. It's out there all the time, you know, dominate the road, or you know, conquer your fears. Even that, right? Like that's something that we think of as a positive thing. Conquer your fears, rather than heal your fears, or transform your fears, or free your fears, right? Dominate or conquer your fears. So what's up with that? What is about that? Rosalind says, our pets don't use words, but they're able to express what they want. How about the unspoken words and body language? I'm so glad you brought that up, Rosalind, because they say that I something crazy like 98% of communication, don't quote me on that number, is nonverbal. At least more than 80% of communication is nonverbal. And so that is a really interesting thing when we look at the way our primary vehicles for communication. So if we're communicating by text, we have the words. We have the words. And those words can be interpreted in all different ways. Nonverbal meaning not based in the words. So our voice inflection is really important. I actually did do telemarketing for a little while. I was living in Florida and was desperate for money, and I was doing some telemarketing, and what they say is that you should smile when you're on the phone because people can hear that smile in your voice. So it conveys through the inflection of your voice, the tonality of your voice. So tonality, inflection is really important. That's how we can find out, is this a question? Like where the word goes, is this a question? There's two different, radically different meanings to that sentence, or different meanings that get conveyed. Susan says, I laugh. Programming, exactly, programming. And Lisa says, that's what we're losing in text and email too. The written word can be heard in so many voices with so many inflections. And Susan says the weather guide does this all the time. Well, all news people do that all the time. They're using their voices. You know, it's so interesting to me where a newscaster is talking about a crisis, a horrible crisis, and their voice is deadpan flat, and like it normalizes this horrible situation, you know, where there's no response. And it's interesting because I remember a couple times, and I'm trying to remember what the circumstance was, but it was a pretty horrible crisis. I don't know if it was, it might have been even from when I was so young, when Kennedy was shot, and a newscaster cried on camera, and it was so profound and so moving because they broke out, they became human again. And so much of the way that we receive information is dehumanized by humans, you know, with no tonality, with no emotion, just reporting these horrific instances, and we just absorb it like, okay, it's just news, rather than these are human events, or these are tragic events. When we hear about somebody being shot, when we hear about some weather type tragedies, when we hear about all these things, they're reported in a deadpan way that tends to normalize them because it strips them of any emotion. And Susan says, yes, commercials too. And I remember also the newscaster crying from over the Kennedy assassination. It was Walter Cronkite, Lisa says. Susan says, I was a child too. And how about that? A vivid memory from childhood, which for me was a long time ago. I guess for all of us, this was in the 60s, right? So it was an epic moment, you know, to be having that shift of perception. You know, here is this somewhat robotic, you know, if you think about it, to be reporting all kinds of disasters and tragedies in this deadpan, non-emotional expression. It was a radical departure from that persona into, oh my gosh, there's a human being here. And, I think, we're talking about language, but it occurs to me just looking at that convention of how the news is reported. It's really crazy. It's really crazy that all these horrible things are being reported with no emotion. And the idea is to clear it of commentary and make it neutral. But these events, to neutralize horrors, what does that do to us in terms of language? What does that do to us in terms of what our experience and expectation and toleration is for the experiences in the world? I mean, it's kind of crazy that there are these things that are happening that are not okay, but they're being communicated to us in a way that is making them a non-event, is making them part of the norm, is making them something that is digestible. And that's, I think that's not okay, because things slip by under the guise of normalcy. We talked about normalcy yesterday, and we just receive them in that fashion without the humanity of it. Lisa says, this is about Walter Cronkite. He tried to hold back the tears, then he let them flow, took off his glasses and cried. Now I'm remembering that, and that was one of the most emotive experiences I can remember. I mean, heck, I was a kid, and it has stuck with me my whole life. And now I don't think that the broadcaster would necessarily cry. I think I remember someone crying, a broadcaster crying over 9/11. With, like, if anything is worthy of tears, that was worthy of tears, right? And Susan says, yes, I caught that right away, discernment. And Lisa says, benign. Exactly. Like we neutralize these experiences to make them benign when they're not. And Susan Aaron says, not okay. And I'm guessing when you say me too my whole life, like something that you remembered that was really, really vivid. So Lisa says, I wasn't born yet, but I saw it on video. Dennis says, you're a great example of mastering the Queen's English. I don't know about that, Dennis. You're very kind. I often find myself at a loss for words, but I really appreciate that. Thank you. Anyway, language shapes us and we shape it. And Dido says, yes, impassive broadcasting tells us to distance ourselves from horrors. And that is thank you for that, Dido. It is a convention of our culture that if we stand back and look at it, we've normalized this, talking about normalization. Is that okay? Is it okay for our news, our source of information, to be dehumanizing the events of our culture? And on top of that, one of the conventions of news is if it bleeds, it leads, right? So that's bad news, and it's all this bad news in a deadpan flat manner, conveyed in a deadpan flat manner, like it's just a matter of fact, just a matter of life. That's how life is, and we're to drink it in. And anybody who is emotionally connected listens to that stuff and is horrified, and yet here are the broadcasters that are just recounting it like, well, it rained today. It's just insanity. If we step back and recognize it, it's freaking insane. So Susan says, no one watches it, then comes change. I if no one watches the news, maybe that's what you're saying. I just, when we know that communication is much more than language, where language itself is a fractional part of our communication, and we strip ourselves of the other modes through which messages are communicated. It's kind of, it reminds me, for some reason, it reminds me of when people say, oh, it's just business, and that's a justification for being morally bankrupt in interactions and communication. Oh, it's just business, like that justifies horrific behavior. And there's something here about, oh, it's just the news. It's not just the news. This is, the words have power, Susan says. Yes, words have power, and there's even more power when we power those words. So when we power that, our words, when we are communicating as human beings, we are animated. Our voice conveys messaging. Our gestures convey messaging. And we have in so many ways devalued emotion and passion and humanity in our culture. Like in a business meeting, you have to be business. You don't express anger, you don't express passion, you don't express excitement, right? Because you're too emotional then. And so that makes us more rational and more reasonable. But the thing is, our rationality without our full complement of beingness, our full complement of emotion and presence and spirit and heart, is not humanity at all. And that's part of the problem that we're facing on this planet, is that we somehow managed to strip our humanity from business and separated ourselves from the experience of being connected to the world. And so, wow, I really got off on a rant here, right? But Lisa says, recently, though, I believe they've been playing up certain stories. They're more acting out facial expressions to bring the hype. It's brought on a flurry of disinformation and decisiveness. Technology over humanity. Technology and big air quotes rationality. And I think you're right that that injecting passion can also be a manipulation. And I think that we are being very effectively manipulated by the media and by consistency from platform to platform, like an orchestrated messaging, that we've been at the effect of as a culture to a large degree. Anyway, language, pretty interesting stuff when we look at how we are shaped by language and how we shape our experience. And by being alert to the language that we use, we do have the capability to shift our experience and the quality of our experience and our communications and our relationships to ourselves and to others and to life. So I think that's it for today. anyway, I so appreciate you and your engagement and this opportunity to share our ideas. I love words too, Lisa, for sure. I think that there's so much available to us when we put attention on ways to effectively articulate our experience and intentions. Lisa says, I'm so glad I was here. This was a good conversation. Thank you for allowing us, says Susan. It's really great to have this. Was a good conversation for me too. I am a lover of language and words, and the I often feel like I'm not as articulate as I would prefer to be, but I'm working at it. Anyway, so much appreciation for you. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I encourage you to check out all the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network, EWN One with the Earth. I think it's EWN Enlightened Living. I think I hadn't been getting the name right before. And of course here. So until next time, so much love to you. And again, deep gratitude. See you soon.